The studio lights were dim, casting a warm amber glow across the room, the kind of lighting that makes memories feel closer than they really are. Justin Hayward sat comfortably in a deep leather chair, his posture relaxed yet reflective, as if time itself had finally slowed down enough for him to speak honestly. At 79 years old, he carried the presence of someone who had lived through entire eras of music, fame, heartbreak, and the kind of quiet truths most people never reveal. The walls behind him were lined with vintage guitars, each one a chapter from the life he had built through melodies. But tonight, the focus was on a single question, one that had followed him for more than 5 decades. What was Nights in White Satin really about? When the interviewer posed the question, Justin didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, eyes drifting downward, as though searching the floor for pieces of a past he had locked away. The silence was soft but heavy, filled with the kind of emotion that needs time to surface. Finally, he breathed out slowly and began to speak. He said that to truly understand the song, you had to understand the young man he was when he wrote Eat a Boy of just 19, caught somewhere between innocence and adulthood, carrying emotions too big for his age. He remembered that tiny room he lived in, a rented space barely large enough for a bed, a chair, and the old acoustic guitar he kept leaning against the wall. The rain would tap against the window almost every night, creating a rhythm that strangely matched the way he felt inside, restless, longing, confused. He wasn't famous then. He wasn't confident. He was just a young man trying to make sense of feelings he didn't yet understand. He said the world seemed too loud, too overwhelming, and music became the only place where he could translate the chaos into something meaningful. He described sitting at his desk late at night, a candle flickering beside him because he couldn't afford a proper lamp. On that desk lay sheets of paper, some blank, some filled with messy scribbles, and one particular letter written on white satin stationery. It wasn't the kind of letter you send. It was the kind you write when your heart is too full but your courage too small. The white satin envelope was delicate, almost fragile, just like the emotions he poured into it. He admitted that he wrote those words for someone he admired deeply, someone who made him feel alive, but someone he was too afraid to be honest with. As Justin spoke, the studio seemed to fade, replaced by the image of a young boy hunched over a notebook, guitar in his lap, trying to capture a feeling he couldn't name. He said the loneliness of those nights didn't scare him. It inspired him. It made him dig deeper into the truth he didn't speak during the day. And in that raw stillness, music began to form lines, melodies, whispers of a song that would later become immortal. He recalled the exact moment the phrase Nights in White Satin came to him. The letter, the envelope, the untouched sincerity of love that was never expressed. To him, white satin symbolized purity, untouched emotion, the kind of love that exists only in dreams and regrets. He said it wasn't about heartbreak in the way people think. It was about longing for connection in a world that often leaves you feeling invisible. The interviewer listened with wide eyes, realizing that the song so many people claimed as their own love story was born from a very private, very personal moment of vulnerability. Justin explained that writing it felt almost like a confession, one he could never give to the person who inspired it. When he strummed the first chords, even he didn't know that he was creating something timeless. He thought he was just releasing the ache inside him. As he spoke, his voice trembled not out of weakness but out of respect for the memory. He said that at 19, he didn't fully understand the depth of what he had written. He didn't know why lines like "I love you, I love you, I love you" felt so heavy, so real, so impossible to say out loud. But he felt compelled to write them, as if the universe itself demanded him to capture that moment of emotional purity. He paused again, smiling gently, almost tenderly, at the thought of his younger self. He said that boy had no idea his private pain would someday become an anthem for millions, no idea that the world would try to interpret the song in 100 different ways. And yet, none of those interpretations were wrong, because the song belonged to anyone who had ever felt something they couldn't express. In the quiet of that studio, Justin's memories hung in the air like a soft echo, and for the first time he admitted that Nights in White Satin wasn't about a woman, or a breakup, or a relationship ending. It was about the universal experience of wanting to be understood, wanting to be seen, wanting to pour your heart into words but never knowing if those words would matter. By the time he finished speaking, the weight of the story had filled the room. The years behind him, the wisdom within him, and the vulnerability he revealed made it clear that this wasn't just a story of a song. It was the story of a boy becoming an artist, of emotion becoming melody, and of a moment in time becoming immortal. The scene opens on a quiet English town in the late 1960s, the kind of place where the streets echo softly with footsteps and the evenings settle like a warm blanket over the rooftops. A young Justin Hayward walks down a narrow cobblestone path, hands in his pockets, his mind far heavier than the cool breeze shifting through the trees. There is a white satin envelope tucked carefully inside his jaqueta. Letter he wrote but has never found the courage to deliver. The letter isn't dramatic or poetic in the traditional sense. It's honest, raw, a confession of emotions he didn't yet understand, but felt deeply. The narrator explains that the woman behind the feeling wasn't someone Justin had a grand romance with. She wasn't a lover or a heartbreak story in the way people often imagine. She was simply someone whose presence stirred something inside him, someone whose smile lingered longer in his mind than he expected. She had a way of walking into a room and making everything seem brighter, yet Justin always felt like a shadow around her, watching quietly, never stepping forward. As Justin walks through the town, he spots her ahead, laughing with friends, her voice carrying lightly on the evening air. She doesn't see him. She never really did, not in the way he hoped. And yet, he felt drawn to her, not because he expected something to happen, but because she awakened a part of him he didn't know existed. She made him really feel for the first time. And at 19, emotions like that can be terrifying. He pauses at a distance, watching her for a moment, memorizing the way her hair catches the fading sunlight. He knows he'll never give her the letter, not because she wouldn't be kind, but because the words inside it were too vulnerable, too raw, too revealing for the boy he was then. The white satin envelope becomes a symbol of the emotion he bottled up, the confession he couldn't voice, and the purity of a love that never had the chance to grow. The scene shifts to Justin standing on a small stone bridge overlooking the water below. The sky has turned a soft purple, the kind that makes everything feel like a painting. He takes out the envelope, running his thumb across its smooth surface. Inside are words he wrote late at night, words about longing, confusion, admiration, and the strange ache of wanting someone you can't speak to. For a moment, he considers delivering it, but then a breeze rushes past him, lifting the envelope right out of his hand. He reaches for it, instinctively, but then stops. He watches it drift through the air like a feather before, landing somewhere far out of reach. The moment becomes the quiet birth of Nights in White Satin. The song wasn't inspired by a romance lived, it was inspired by a romance imagined, a feeling unspoken, a truth too delicate to expose. As the letter disappears, Justin stands there in silence, knowing something inside him has shifted. The emotion that had no home, no voice, no resolution would now find its place in music, and that single moment of watching the letter fly away becomes the spark that ignites one of the most haunting melodies in rock history. Inside Decca Studios in 1967, the air was thick with anticipation. The Moody Blues were experimenting, pushing boundaries that most bands of their era didn't dare approach. Rock music blended with orchestral elements was still unfamiliar territory, and no one knew if it would work. The engineers moved around the studio, adjusting knobs, preparing microphones, and checking cables as the orchestra tuned their instruments. Violins hummed softly, cellos resonated, and a quiet tension filled the room. In the center of it all stood a young Justin Hayward, holding his guitar with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. Justin wasn't just recording another song. He was preparing to pour his heart into a microphone, to expose emotions he had never spoken aloud. The lyrics of Nights in White Satin were too personal, so intimate that he worried people might see too deeply into his soul. At 19, that kind of vulnerability was almost unbearable. He swallowed hard, strummed a few practice chords, and tried to quiet the storm inside him. The orchestra conductor lifted his baton, signaling the musicians to prepare. Justin stepped closer to the microphone. His palms were sweating. His mind drifted back to the white satin letter. The unspoken truth, the longing, all of it lived inside this song. He wasn't just singing. He was reopening a wound, reliving every emotion embedded in the lyrics. The silence before the first note felt sacred. Then the music began. The orchestral strings rose softly at first, like a whisper brushing against the walls of the studio. The sound wrapped around Justin, urging him forward. He closed his eyes, let out a slow breath, and started to sing. His voice sung trembling, full of unsteady power, cut through the room. The engineers in the control booth exchanged quick glances. They had never heard anything like it. The fragility of his voice mixed with the haunting arrangement created an atmosphere that felt almost otherworldly. As the song progressed, something remarkable happened. Justin stopped thinking. He stopped worrying about how he sounded or how people would interpret the lyrics. He simply surrendered to the music. Every word he sang carried the weight of the feelings he had kept hidden. The orchestra swelled behind him, lifting his voice, amplifying his raw sincerity. A single tear escaped him during the chorus, but he didn't break. He kept singing, letting every emotion flow through him. In the control room, the producer leaned forward, his eyes locked on the recording meters. One of the engineers whispered, This is something special." They knew they were capturing a moment that wouldn't just be heard, it would be felt. The final note echoed through the studio, slowly fading into silence. No one spoke at first. It was as if the entire room needed a moment to process what had just happened. Justin opened his eyes, breathing heavily, unsure if he had done enough. Then the conductor lowered his baton, and the producer pressed the talkback button, his voice soft but firm. "Justin." That was magic. In that single recording session, a timeless masterpiece was born, and Justin Hayward had unknowingly poured his youth, his longing, and his heart into a song the world would never forget. Decades passed, and Nights in White Satin transformed from a deeply personal confession into something far larger than Justin Hayward ever imagined. The world had taken hold of the song and reshaped it, breathing new stories, new emotions, and new meanings into it. What began as a private reflection from a lonely 19-year-old boy became an anthem sung by millions across generations. Concert halls around the world turned into echo chambers of voices, men, women, young, old, singing along to every word with a passion that left Justin humbled every single time, night after night. Justin stood backstage, watching audiences before he stepped into the spotlight. Waves of fans held up lights swaying gently, waiting for the opening notes. Many in the crowd didn't even know the story behind the song. They simply knew how it made them feel. To them, it wasn't a memory of Justin's life, it was a soundtrack to their own. The narrator explains how some people connected it to heartbreak, others to the loss of a loved one, and some to the kind of love that changes you forever. Justin often said he was astonished by how listeners turned the song into something personal. In old interviews, he recalled fans approaching him with stories so deep, so emotional, that even he struggled to respond. One man told him the song played during the first moment he realized he was in love. A woman confessed she played it every night for weeks after losing her husband. Another said the song had saved her marriage, reminding her and her partner of the vulnerability they had forgotten. Justin listened to each story quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes emotional, always appreciative. The song no longer belonged to him. It had grown beyond its creator. It had become a vessel for humanity's collective feelings: joy, sorrow, longing, nostalgia, heartbreak, and healing. On stage, as the spotlight lowered on him and the first chord rang through the arena, Justin often glanced at the crowd with a look that mixed gratitude with disbelief. The orchestra behind him would rise, just as it did in that 1967 studio session. But now the energy was different. Back then he was a boy singing his heart out, unsure if anyone would ever understand. Now he was a man witnessing thousands of people understanding the song in their own way. As he sang, he would sometimes catch sight of fans crying, some embracing, some closing their eyes as if reliving a moment from their past. And in those moments, Justin realized something profound. The song had outgrown his original meaning. It no longer needed the backstory or the explanation. It had become its own living entity. In interviews, Justin would later admit that the power of the song amazed him more in his later years than in his youth. "The song stopped being mine a long time ago," he once said quietly. "Now it belongs to anyone who needs it." Scene 4 ends with Justin stepping off stage, hearing the lingering echoes of thousands singing his words back to him, proof that a song written from loneliness became a universal language of emotion. The final scene opens on a peaceful morning inside Justin Hayward's home. Sunlight spills gently through a wide window, illuminating the room with a soft golden glow. The world outside is quiet, birds perched on branches, a calm breeze brushing past the glass, and the comforting silence that often accompanies a life rich with years and reflection. At 79, Justin sits in a simple armchair by the window, a cup of tea resting beside him, his fingers idly tapping the armrest in a rhythm only he understands. He looks older, yes, but not tired. His presence carries the weight of a man who has lived fully, felt deeply, and finally reached the point where truth is no longer something to hide, but something to embrace. The interviewer asks him a question he has heard countless times across decades. After all these years, what was Nights in White Satin truly about? But this time, Justin doesn't hesitate. Instead, he smiles softly, as if he's finally ready to share the answer he once kept sealed away. He turns his gaze toward the window, watching the light dance across the floor, and begins to speak in a voice seasoned with wisdom and vulnerability. He explains that when he wrote the song at 19, he didn't fully understand the depth of what he was creating. He only knew that he was overwhelmed by emotions that didn't fit neatly into words, conversations, or confessions. He wasn't writing about a relationship or a dramatic romance. He wasn't writing about heartbreak in the traditional sense. He was writing about the ache of loving deeply while being unable to express it. He describes how white satin wasn't just a material, it symbolized purity, the kind of love that exists before complications, before rejection, before reality shapes it into something else, the kind of love that lives untouched in the heart, even when it has no chance of ever being spoken aloud. The scene shifts to a montage of Justin at different ages. The young man strumming a guitar alone in his room, the rising star performing on stage with fire in his eyes, the mature artist standing before thousands, and now the wise elder reflecting on a life lived through music. His voice overlays these images, each word steady and sincere. He admits that when he first wrote the lyrics, he felt confused emotionally and spiritually. He didn't know who he was becoming, what he wanted, or how to navigate the intensity of feelings that seemed too big for a boy his age. Nights in White Satin, he says, wasn't about a woman at all. It was about that very confusion, about longing for clarity, for connection, for understanding. It was about the feeling of writing down everything you wish you could say, yet never having the courage to deliver the words. He pauses, breathing in slowly, and then continues with something he has rarely shared. The song was also about identity, about finding himself through music at a time when he didn't feel seen or heard. The white satin letter symbolized everything he kept inside: hope, fear, tenderness, and the desire to be understood by someone, anyone. Music became the only place he could be honest without fear of judgment. The narrator describes how, as Justin reflects, his eyes shine with both nostalgia and acceptance. He no longer looks back with sadness or longing. Instead, he sees the beauty in the uncertainty he once felt. At 79, he understands what the young Justin could not, that the emotions behind the song were not signs of weakness, but signs of depth. They were the seeds of the artist he would become, in a softer tone. Justin adds that the meaning of the song evolved over the years, not just for the world, but for him as well. What once felt like a confession of loneliness now feels like a message about growth. He says that as he aged, he realized the song was never really about loss. It was about beginnings. It was about becoming the kind of person who can feel deeply, express honesty, and create something timeless from vulnerability. He finishes his reflection with a gentle smile, saying, "At 19, I thought it was a sad song. At 79, I see it was the start of everything." His voice softens, almost blending with the quiet morning air. He looks out the window one last time, allowing the moment to settle, a moment where past and present meet, where the boy he once was and the man he became finally understand each other. The screen fades as the first delicate notes of Nights in White Satin begin to play softly in the background. A lifetime of emotion distilled into a single truth. The meaning of the song was never about someone else, it was about him, about longing, awakening, and the gentle, painful beauty of becoming who you are meant to be.